Mr Hanson, I rise to speak to the amendments number 217 and 87 in the names of my honourable friends and myself. They are probing amendments and I do not aim to detain the House for a protracted period of time. Amendment 217, along with Amendment 64, would exclude the European Economic Area Agreement from the bill, allowing the UK to keep open the option of remaining in the EEA as negotiations proceed. The current version of the bill seeks to repeal the domestic effects of the EEA agreement, but the British Government has given no explicit notice to withdraw under Article 127 of the 1994 EEA agreement. Our departure, therefore, from the single market is not inevitable. There is still time to change a path which puts the economy first, which was a point made by many honourable members previously in the debate. As we leave the EU, our continued membership of the single market and the customs union is absolutely crucial to the viability of the Welsh economy beyond Brexit. In wanting to leave the single market and the customs union, the government is contradicting itself. The same European red tape which the Brexiteers belittle as a regulatory burden is in fact what which safeguards the environment, keeps our food safe and our rights upheld. By taking the UK outside of the EEA and the customs union, the British government would be putting up gratuitous red tape for our key exporters. Employers in my constituency would be faced with unnecessary logistical and financial barriers to sell to their European markets, which is of course by far the most important market for our exporters. We've been told again and again that the hard Brexit will reinstate the UK as a global power. Despite sounding appetising, it is wholly illogical. It is counterintuitive to say that removing the UK from the world's most successful and richest economic bloc as an equal partner will in any way make the UK more global. In reality, the Tories are reverting to their 19th century policy of splendid isolationism. To leave the single market and the customs union is to voluntarily exclude ourselves from having unencumbered access to markets necessary to the longevity and viability of the economies of Wales and in fact the UK post-Brexit. Mr Hanson, the statistics don't lie. Wales exports some £16 billion worth of goods every year, more than the entire Welsh Government's budget. But whilst reducing access to our main markets in Europe, the Government has no guarantee of any new markets after exit day. Some 200,000 jobs in Wales are sustained by the single market and the customs union. By wrenching us out of both those key frameworks, the British Government is effectively rolling the dice with the livelihoods of over 200,000 people in my country.
Of course, the UK government, not content with raising trade barriers with 27 countries in the world where we do half our trade, is also by fact of the 38 other agreements that the European Union has with other countries, is going to raise with another 67. So we're about 94 countries where we're facing higher trade barriers. And when you ask the ministers of this government how many countries will there be, they have absolutely no idea how this is going to roll. The dice he's talking about.
Well, the chairman of the Select Committee, of course, speaks with some great expertise on this. That was one of the first questions I asked on the floor of this House to the International Trade Secretary when he was appointed to his role. And that's something that's gone missing in this debate. We were informed at the time that that transition would be seamless. It appears that that might not be the case, as the British government previously thought. These aren't idle threats, Mr Hanson. This is the reality. Only yesterday, Aston Martin's Chief Executive Officer came here to the House of Commons and told members, and I quote directly, "A no-deal Brexit would mean a cessation of production of their cars in the UK. That means their new flagship plant in the Secretary of State's for Wales's backyard in the Vale of Glamorgan could be pulled even before they begin the production of their first car." Mr Hanson, my concerns and that of my Plaid Cymru colleagues are entirely predicated on Wales's national interest. This means ensuring full and unconstrained access to our important European markets, the destination for 67% of all Welsh exports and 90% of our food and drink exports. It means our NHS, universities and industries can recruit skilled workers from across Europe. It means putting Welsh jobs, wages and fundamentally our nation's future first. It is not feasible that trade deals with Australia, New Zealand and other far-flung nations will replace the level of economic activity that the EU trade sustains in Wales. Mr Hanson, leaving the single market and the customs union does not mean going back to some comfortable status quo. On exit day, we need a reliable and effective system in place to prevent potential catastrophe. We have the option of remaining in the single market and the customs union, and that's been made quite clear by Chief Negotiator Barnier during the discussions to date. It would be the most prudent economic path to maintain those vital economic frameworks, instead of endeavouring to create something new and untested. which couldn't possibly replicate the benefits of EEA status. Mr Hanson, I also want to say a few words about Amendment 87. On which point?
Before he leaves his discussion of EEA membership, does he not accept that Article 126 of the EEA agreement provides explicitly that the EEA agreement itself applies only to members of the European Union and to the relevant members of EFTA? Given that we will be neither, how can it possibly apply to us?
Well, I understand that's the point that's been also made by the First Minister of Wales when he was against this position before he changed to actually agreeing with the Plaid Cymru position. But surely what we should be endeavouring to achieve is what was promised by Brexiteers such as Daniel Hannan prior to the referendum debate, when he was saying that the Norway solution would be the most applicable and the best solution for the UK.
For a little bit of assistance to the Honourable Gentleman, the fact is that the United Kingdom signed the EEA agreement in 1993 as a sovereign country. It is a single and separate contracting party. The body of legal opinion is very divided on this issue. Eminent experts such as Charles Markand and George Yarrow have made it clear that they believe that in order for the United Kingdom to leave the EEA, it must trigger Article 127 of the EEA agreement. Given that legal opinion is divided, this is surely a political issue that needs to be brought to this House, this sovereign House, so that we can take back control and have a vote, a proper debate and a vote on the issue.
Well, I'm always grateful to the assistance from the member for Aberavon, of course, also speaks with great authority on these issues. And from where I am approaching these negotiations, it seems that the decision of the British government to say they want to be aside the single market and the customs union has created this huge friction in terms of the negotiations with the European Union. If we were to say we want to stay inside the single market and the customs union, I would hazard a guess that these negotiations would proceed at a far greater pace and reach a far more amicable destination. Moving to Amendment 87, Mr Hanson. This alters the definition of EU retained law so as only to include reserved areas of legislation. This will allow the National Assembly for Wales and other devolved administrations to legislate on areas of EU-derived law which fall under devolved competency for themselves. After 2 referenda and hundreds of thousands of votes cast, the people of Wales chose to create a primary law-making parliament in Cardiff. It decides on the policies which matter most to the people of Wales in their day-to-day lives, such as education, health, the environment, to name but a few. The latest round of devolution saw the creation of the reserve powers model, stripping away the unnecessary jargon and constitutional complexity. This in effect means that the National Assembly for Wales has control over everything that is not explicitly listed as a matter kept by Westminster. This was meant to simplify matters and create clarity. In fact, the current Secretary of State for Wales went as far as to say that this change would settle the constitutional question in Wales for a generation. We can only assume he was talking in terms of fruit flies when he made that comment. As before April 2018, when the newest devolution settlement comes into full force, we are faced with nothing short of a constitutional crisis.
Is that not really the crux both for Scotland and Wales, in that the basis of the Scotland Act was certainly that everything not reserved was devolved, and this principle of bringing powers to Westminster instead of to where the competencies lie reverses that principle?
Well, I'm very, very grateful for that intervention, and that's of course why the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government in a joint declaration have said that this bill is a naked power grab, and what we're trying to address by this amendment. The UK Government's withdrawal bill flies in the face of the reserve powers model, as we were discussing. Rather than the new powers brought about by Brexit flowing straight to Wales, as would be the case under the reserve powers model, they would be kept under lock and key in Westminster, in what the UK Government is calling a holding pattern. All we have is the UK Government's Boy Scout promise that one day we might get these powers, and the ones we lost back. For that matter, if devolution is a process, why should we assume that centralisation is not also?
What the Honourable Gentleman is describing there is really quite ironic, because what he's describing there is the creation of a superstate, the British superstate of the United Kingdom, where they are taking all the powers that should be devolved to take it with the central. And the supreme irony is they were complaining that Europe was a superstate. It wasn't, it was a trade bloc. But to get out of the trade bloc, they are themselves now creating a superstate.
Well, very grateful for that intervention, and essentially I think that's the fear that we face. What we're seeing here is Brexit being used as a tool to reassert Westminster control over the British state, as opposed to the devolution settlement we've had since '99. There is nothing to say that come Brexit Day, Westminster decides that all powers must make their way back to the corridors of SW1. It has come to the situation that my party is proposing legislation in the National Assembly to simply defend the lacklustre devolution settlement we already have. My colleague Steffan Lewis AM has proposed a Welsh continuity bill. This continuity bill will give the Welsh Parliament the legislative might it needs to take on Westminster and the power grab in this bill. Mr Hanson, let me close with this. Last night this House blocked Wales's voice on Brexit. My voice and the voice of Plaid Cymru cannot be silenced, and we will do everything in our influence to stop the constitutional and economic chaos this bill is seeking to impose on our nation.
Yeah.